I'm Tony Deblauwe, founder of Spirited Conversation. On this episode, we are at Wingtip in downtown San Francisco. I'll share a very special whiskey with world-famous fashion designer Rubin Singer. Join us as he talks about his background and shares his insights on what it takes to build a global fashion brand and the life-changing moments that skyrocketed his business. Hey, Rubin.
Hey, Tony.
Great to see you.
You too. How
Please
are
have
you?
a seat. Awesome, thanks. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me.
Of course.
And have a spirited conversation.
Yes.
And before we do that, I have a special choice of spirit for you today.
Great.
It's the Nika Takusuro 17-year-old pure malt.
So this is a blended whiskey, 17-year-old, and it has a very rich tradition. Japanese, and I know you appreciate the Japanese
I do.
culture. And the original maker, Masataka Takatsuru, was coming from a long tradition of sake makers. But he was determined to make a crafted Japanese whiskey. So he spent time in Glasgow. He learned everything down to the chemistry until he finally came up with what he believed was the perfect, elegant, designed whiskey. So very similar to your background and your performance and power and design. So let's give it a try.
Let's. Cheers.
Cheers. You've had an incredible year, lots of great collections, a lot of great designs and changes in the industry and so forth. But I've always been curious about, because you have this rich background and tradition, your family has a long lineage of couturiers that has, influenced what you've seen and grown up with, your global background. How much of that have you woven into not only your design, but how you approach your business?
It's hard to extrapolate and to separate one from the other because it's been such a huge part of my whole cognizant existence, being brought up in the industry, being a third generation of Russian fashion designers, having watched my father design couture from time I can remember. So to separate myself necessarily from that is almost impossible in my mind. So it's influenced and infiltrated almost everything that I do. I mean, when you look at my clothes, I believe that you get a very strong sense of old world tradition. It almost has the aftertaste of couture, almost everything that I do. So it's very much informed me as a designer, and also in many ways me as a businessman, just having watched my father work my whole childhood and adolescence, watching him present his collections or sell his clothes or do all the things that he did. So it's informed my subconscious and my conscience on levels that I can't even really fully understand, but that affect and inform me to this day.
And one of the things you talk about with your designs is social armor. So what does that really mean?
My brand philosophy and the way that I approach design very much has to do about empowerment. I really do believe that, clothing for us, really for everyone, is a way to project who you are as a person. It's the first thing that people really get a sense of your identity. How do you want to be perceived, or how do you really feel? Or how do you want to sort of cloak that or hide that, or whatever approach you're trying to take. So that's how I approach the philosophy of social armor.
And also it's a very, very great stance to take when you're building a business in a very competitive world.
Of course.
Naturally, you go from the designer and the sketchbook dreaming about how can I build this business, where it could go, and in the development of that business, there's always pivotal moments. For you, it was the 2013 Super Bowl halftime show,
right,
where you styled Beyonce. Talk to me about that and what it meant for you and your business.
You look at many accomplished designers or businessmen in general, there are those moments in one's career that are a sort of before and after moment. The moment that sort of everything shifts or turns. Like every success story has that one pivotal tipping point, if you will. For me, it was that very experience. At the time that I got the job to design all the costumes for her and the whole performance, I knew it was a big deal. I just didn't realize how big of a deal it really was until much later. From my perspective at the time, I thought it was, oh my God, this is so amazing. This is going to change my career. And I knew that it would. But the subsequent aftermath of all of that and how the trajectory has continued even to affect the perception to this day is so massive, both on a creative sort of brand knowledge, but also on a business level, that it was really hard for me to quantify before the experience versus after. It took the brand and put it into every household in America. It took the knowledge of who I was and made it common, so to speak. It shifted everything in a tectonic way, and it was an amazing experience.
So how did it make you feel when all of the publicity and the press, and I would imagine orders, started to come through, where you started to feel like, this thing's really taken off, my business is fundamentally changing? How did you personally deal with those changes as they were coming?
Well, I dealt with them with great joy and pleasure, to be honest. But
that's always good.
Yeah. But the onslaught happened moments after she finished the performance and really didn't stop probably for months. The phone started to ring off the hook about 5 minutes after the show had ended, and really did not stop for weeks, and then slowed down a little bit, but not for many, many months. And the difference is that it validated the brand and my work on a level that it had not been before, and therefore there was a bigger confidence in the major retailers putting bigger buys behind me. There was more confidence in editors pulling pieces for photography, for editorials. There just became a dialogue that hadn't been there before, and a confidence that was fundamentally cemented right after that experience.
I think it's everybody's dream,
of course,
to have that huge growth come immediately after a product launch like that.
Yeah.
You know, the challenge has come now with, I have to build a business around this. Suddenly, overnight, everything starts to change. How did you start to think about that balance between the two worlds?
The concept that I did for her was based on a collection that I was already working on. So the reason why I got the gig was because the stylist had come in, because I was actually working on a costume for her New Year's performance, and they saw what I was doing for my upcoming February show, and they were so excited about it, they asked me to, present to her for Super Bowl. So it was an outgrowth of what I was already doing for my collection, which was an incredibly fortuitous situation for me, because having gone off of the heels of that, it was a natural progression that my collection then reflected that same feeling and that same concept of the collection was called Valkyrie's Dominion, so it was all sort of very aggressive leather, 1930s Germany mixed in with 1970s, Helmut Newton. So it was all very sexually charged, very sort of stylized and quite aggressive in many ways. And so that was the outgrowth of that particular season. And what was wonderful about it was I really didn't have to suffer through trying to apply and fuse that moment with what I was doing commercially and professionally. So I was very blessed with that moment. But then once that was done, I was kind of really over that whole concept, and I had been living with it for so long now that I really wanted to go into a completely different world, and I really wanted to focus on my client and my business, right? So it was really about taking what I had done there and completely shifting it in terms of the color, the textures, everything, kind of making it something different so that I wasn't pigeonholed into one thing. And through that process, I discovered a completely different genre of inspiration, which actually also came from working with her on the next project, which was her tour. And I was given the task of creating a opening scene of a queen.
Wow.
And the whole queen sequence. I really didn't want to do the traditional expected, like, oh, she's going to be, you know, Marie Antoinette or any kind of expected sort of European sort of monarch. I really was thinking at other things like the Queen of Hearts or the Queen of the Night or all these different other kinds of queens, and I came up with, you know, the pharaonic queens of ancient Egypt and Hatshepsut and all these sort of concepts. And from that came the next phase of what I was doing. So it was a really interesting outgrowth of how that all kind of came about.
So coming up with those other lines stayed within your theme and your brand of the power and that aggressive styling, which is great. So you're furthering your vision, and I totally understand the I don't want to be a one-trick pony over the Super Bowl thing, but the reality is your business is now becoming a rocket ship. It starts to become more than just about you, and all organizations need the right people and staff around them to make that success go forward.
Absolutely.
My mom was a couture tailor, and I certainly understand all the stories that went into the business and crafting, you know, garments and everything. How critical are tailors to you in your business?
Hugely critical. I mean, you know, I'm not an artist where I rely, I mean, I am an artist, but I'm not, let's say, a painter that relies exclusively on my hands, my emotions, and a canvas. I have a whole armada of people that I rely on in order to execute my vision, my deliveries, my sales, and so on. And really at the core of that are the tailors, because they're the ones that are helping me achieve the vision of the actual product in the garment. So without them, there's very little I could do.
I think one of the important things that any business owner has, especially one that's creative like yourself, is creating that consistency as you scale your business.
Right.
And as much as design is important, so is the customer experience.
Of course.
So between your vision of what you want to deliver in that experience and keeping everybody together, what would you call your non-negotiables of providing that absolute unique customer experience?
Well, fit.
Fit.
Yes. The experience that the customer actually has in the clothes and how they make them feel and how they make them look really all depends on how you construct the garment. So that's really at the core of how you build the foundation of a house. At the core of that experience really is the construction and how these garments make the client fit. And one of the things that I hear over and over and over and over and over again, both from the sales associates in the stores or the private shoppers or the clients themselves, is how comfortable these clothes are and how you're like wearing nothing. And for a gown per se, like a corseted gown, to feel like nothing is quite an achievement. So that really comes down to how the clothes make the person feel. And if a person feels not only comfortable but also empowered, as we were saying before, and she also feels beautiful and she feels like she's not wearing anything in a way, all of those things feed into the ultimate experience of what she felt and how she felt in the clothes, which then builds on the continuity of the brand and builds a clientele that is a follower that is consistently buying the product and that grows with the brand.
That brand and that consciousness around this is what you wanted to deliver at the end of the day forms your values.
Of course.
Right? And I think when you build a business and you have people around you, they all have to be in sync with that thinking.
Yes.
And it can be a challenge sometimes from the very mechanical, tactical, technical pieces that the tailors deal with all the way through the sales floor or the client coming into your boutique and so on, looking forward. So again, 4 times a year, you're going through this incredible process of that's timeline driven, but you're trying to be creative. There's the other parts of your business you have to deal with and so forth. So looking at future planning, you have an interesting statement where you, when asked about how do you think about future collections, and you say, well, the future hasn't really shined its light, so to speak, yet for me to be able to answer that sufficiently. So what does that mean?
Well, there's a long incubation period that happens from an idea all the way to an actual realization of a concept, then to actually an implementation of a concept, then an actual execution of a concept, and then the unveiling and so forth. So there's a long, arduous sort of a lot of internal stuff that happens, and it's quite abstract, so it's difficult to fully articulate, but I'll do my best. So each season is building upon itself step by step, you know, brick by brick, so to speak. So each one is kind of like a stacking system of, you know, information and experiences, not just with the concept, but also with the sales, with the merchandising, with what people have liked, what people haven't liked, what you have to continuously push onto people to make them actually realize that they will like it, even though they don't at first. Sometimes it takes a few seasons for people to catch up with what you're saying, or for me to like rework an idea so that I can keep the concept but still deliver it in a way that is more appetizing to the buyer, to the consumer. So all of those things feed into that whole process. And I just did my 30th collection. I finished my 30th season, and I called the collection Homomorphism, and it's based on an algebraic function, an abstract algebraic function. And the reason why I chose math was because I really felt like after 30 collections, I needed to recalibrate and reconstitute and really figure out what is the next phase of my career. And to do that, I had to really look backwards and really look at what I had accomplished up until now, both in terms of a concept creative level, but also in terms of a business and consumer level. And so homomorphism is an abstract algebraic function that essentially says that no matter, you have a given set of numbers, a value of numbers, and no matter how many functions that those numbers go through, the value always ends up at the same endpoint. And that's really what I felt like I was dealing with. I felt like I needed to recalibrate myself, kind of rework all of the greatest sort of attributes of my design, but develop them in a new way and really focus on them in a new way. The end result still being me, but in a new way. And so that very much speaks to the point of what you're asking about. Like, do I know where it's going to end up? No. You know, I know in the beginning phase of the process of what my concept needs to be, or what I'm inspired by, but only through the actual journey do I get to the point where I know what it all looks like.
Yeah, and I think most business owners and entrepreneurs can feel that sense of the
Correct.
great growth, but then I have to reinvent myself, and I have to be willing to look at things and throw them away, as well as think about what I haven't seen or heard or felt yet, and still be okay with that and knowing that my business will be just fine.
Right.
Rubin, thank you so much for taking the time with
Tony.
me.
It's so great.
I appreciate it. One last question I have for you.
Sure.
And that is, if you could share a drink with anyone, who would it be and why?
That's a tough question. There's a few people that I would want to do it with, but in terms of a person that is relevant to who I am as a designer and what I believe to be somebody that I would, you know, love to speak to and really get a feeling for, would be Cristobal Balenciaga. And the reason why is because he's one of the only designers that approached clothing from such an esoteric, beautiful point of view. I would love to, and he was a recluse, and there's very little that information that you can actually get on him as an individual. So it would be fascinating for me to sit down and have a conversation with him like this and really see what he would have to say about who he was as a creative and as a businessman, as a visionary.
Well, fantastic. Let's toast to that.
Let's. Cheers. Cheers.